Hi, General Petraeus. Welcome back to Power Play. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Mike. Thanks.
So we're coming up on a week of this war, and you said the short-term challenge will be to find and destroy Iran's missile stocks and manufacturing facilities. The U.S. and Israel are also targeting the Revolutionary Guard Corps and every single headquarters. How would you assess the progress on those fronts?
Oh, I think it's very impressive. I'd also add in there, by the way, the drone program. You have to go after that as well. That's proved to be problematic. The missile numbers have come down very substantially if you look at the statistics. The drone numbers, not so much so, and obviously they have a much smaller warhead, but they are equally challenging. And in some cases, the challenge has been so much that we or Gulf states have shot missile interceptors at them, which is not a good exchange. In fact, I have an article in foreignpolicy.com published yesterday that's titled "The Drone Attrition Trap," and it lays out that you're on the wrong end of the calculation if you spend a $2 million missile interceptor to knock down a $20,000 or $30,000 Iranian drone. So that would be part of it as well. The Iranian Navy is a big element here. We want to get shipping going back again in the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz as quickly as can possibly be done. And while the military campaign is going very, very impressively, I mean, we're probably approaching 6,000 individual targets now that have been engaged by either sea-launched or air-launched cruise missiles, the munitions from the stealth bombers and stealth fighters, the B-2 and F-35 respectively. And now, because we've taken down the air and ballistic missile defenses so substantially, we're flying the unstealthy aircraft directly over. Now we're talking about the really heavy hitters, the B-52 and B-1 bombers as well. So you look at each category of the military missions, and I think we're doing very impressively against them. The problem is that there is not a military mission which is bring about regime change. Mm-hmm. President Trump, I think, has been very clear that the military's mission is to, in a way, set conditions in which political transition might take place. But that's going to depend on what is done inside Iran, either by disaffected units of their military, perhaps some of the minorities. We've seen the Iranian Kurds apparently being enabled to take out some operation. There are also Azeris, there are Turkmen, there's Baluch and Sunnis. So all of this, again, is possible, but I don't think the base case is that there is regime change in this particular campaign.
How concerned are you about that, specifically because I know you've said in previous interviews that you can lay the groundwork for this, but if there isn't someone on the ground there or a group of people on the ground there who are willing to fill that vacuum. I mean, we know that U.S. President Donald Trump had said, he started this campaign saying that he was hoping Iranians would pick a new leader and that they would rise up and do that, or that somebody else would step forward. Now he's saying that he would like to be in the process of picking a new leader. Do you think that that is a miscalculation here by the president?
Well, I think it's a wonderful aspiration, and I'd love to see him inserted into the Assembly of Experts process as they pick the next leader. But by the way, they tried to meet the other day, and the Israelis actually bombed the location where they were going to carry out their sessions. This is essentially the conclave that chooses the next supreme leader. Keep in mind that they are essentially hardline clerics, and presumably they will pick someone who is similar to their orientation. It's not impossible that a more pragmatic figure could assume the leadership. It's possible the Revolutionary Guards Corps could shoulder the clerics aside in some way and say, you know, what this has brought us is driving our country into poverty at home and isolation abroad. We're squandering the incredible blessings we have of the #2 largest natural gas reserves in the world, the #3 crude oil reserves, an educated population, an ancient civilization. All of this, they should be the UAE on steroids, a 92 million population, so a big market at home even. And instead, what they have done is bring this onto them. You're talking about 1 million men under arms who have demonstrated a willingness to kill their own citizen in the tens of thousands in January alone, while imprisoning tens of thousands more. So who is going to stand up against that? It's not clear that that particular organization has yet identified itself. It will require a great leader, really staffs, headquarters, hierarchy, elements, organization, etc. And again, I'm not sure where that comes from. There is a possibility of some kind of civil war ongoing, but I don't know that you see a force that's large enough to defeat the regime protection forces and the other ancillary elements that typically support them.
I wanted to ask you about some of the reaction from U.S. allies. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had supported at the beginning of all this, the U.S. acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Then he did say that Canada arrived at that position with, quote, regret. What is your assessment of how Canada and other allies are supporting it or lack thereof?
Well, it's been interesting this time that some of the very traditional allies have not fully supported this from the beginning, but many have been drawn into it. The UK is an example where the Prime Minister did not really want to get involved, didn't immediately let us use the bases that they have available, some of which can be very valuable. Diego Garcia out in the Indian Ocean is a great recovery location and actually a great location from which to fly for the long-range bombers. And yet was drawn into it when Hezbollah sent a drone after the airfield that they have in Cyprus. The Germans have been a good bit more forward-leaning, so is the NATO Secretary General. The French, more like the Brits up front, but now their base was attacked in the UAE, so they're going to have to get more involved. They'll allow us to use their bases. Even the countries in the region, the Gulf states, had sought to take a knee during this particular effort, denied us the right to use the bases that we often have been able to use, but then were drawn into it when Iran engaged in what's termed horizontal escalation. In other words, they just didn't retaliate against U.S. bases and facilities and Israeli targets. They went after the Gulf states. They hit a hotel, hit seaport, airport, energy loading facilities, and on and on. And those countries now are getting drawn more into this. In fact, it's the opposite of what Iran hoped would happen, which is I think they hoped that the Gulf states would then put pressure on the United States to bring this to a close. And in fact, that is not what they're doing. They are extending more assistance to us to enable us, as we are also very much helping them by integrating all of the ballistic missile defenses and now also the counter-drone defenses.
I've only got a short amount of time left with you, so I wanted to ask you on this last question. You've become famous for a phrase during the Iraq War, "Tell me how this ends." Because you've been asked that nearly every conflict since then, I'm going to ask it in a different way to you. What does victory look like in your mind?
First of all, it's just for those watching, this is when I was a two-star general during the fight to Baghdad, and it was obvious to me that all the assumptions that had been given were being invalidated one by one, and I turned to my embedded reporter, forgetting that I was on the record, and quizzically or rhetorically asked, "Tell me how this ends." In this case, victory, I think, is what President Trump declares it to be, frankly. I think we will have achieved the military objectives of this campaign, but I'm not at all confident that we're going to see the conditions for regime change being taken advantage of by an element that has the sufficient power to indeed challenge that regime. So I think at a certain point in time, a number of different factors will be considered. Among those will be economic factors. What is the price of Brent crude at that time? What is that doing to the price of West Texas Intermediate? What that's doing to the economies in Asia, Europe, and even at home, noting that we lost 90,000 jobs over the last month and so forth. So it'll be a whole, what's this sentiment in the country about this war? What is the sentiment within the base of the president's party? A lot of these different factors. If there is an opposition that starts to emerge, should we continue a bit longer to help enable them? What is the missile math? That is, I think, one of the factors that led to the end of the 12-day campaign at 12 days was that the Israelis in particular, and I was just in Tel Aviv a few weeks ago and validated this, they were getting concerned that the Iranians had more launchers and more missiles than perhaps they had missile interceptors. And given that 5 to 7% of the missiles were getting through anyway, the last thing you want to do is not be able to deal with those given the enormous destructive power that they have. So all of these different factors, I think, will be considered, and a determination will be made. Okay, here we are. We're under budget and ahead of time, and we're declaring victory at that point in time. Then the question is, what is the character of the new supreme leader or the new leadership? Is it more pragmatic than it has been in the past when it has undertaken these ruinous decisions, and it considers victory just mere survival of the regime, no matter how much damage and destruction they have brought onto their own country? So those are the dynamics, I think, that will be in play, and I think they'll start to really be seriously considered within a week or so, and then you will see what it is that the president decides about the duration of this particular effort.
Okay, we're going to leave it on that note. Retired General David Petraeus, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Mike. Thank you.